Just a brief introduction to myself, if you haven't come across me before. My name is Terry. I'm the founder and CEO of Longevity Leaders. I've been working with Tina now for quite some time, and I'm really pleased to be a partner of the all-party parliamentary group for longevity, which Tina leads. Over the past week or two, Tina has been convening with the APPG a series of roundtables, which has been focused on exploring the business coalition for healthier, longer lives. And I think today's session is really to bring to a head the learnings from those discussions, and I'm really delighted that Tina has managed to pull together such an incredibly fantastic array of contributors and participants and observers to this process. So I'm going to, I guess, hand over the reins to Geoffrey Filkin in a minute to talk you through some of his takeaways from this process. But before I did, I wanted to launch a poll that might help set the scene for some of the conversations there. So let me see if I can do that now. And if everyone would take just a second or two to fill in this poll. And while you're doing that, I'll just run you through some of the etiquette of how this session will be run. We are encouraging people to submit questions. You can do so by clicking on the Q&A box at your screen controls and typing your question in there. But also we would encourage people to contribute verbally. To do so, all you'd need to do is raise your hand. There should be a button on your screen that allows you to do that. And when we see that your hand is raised, we will come to you and Tina will enable your mic and you can ask your question directly to the panelists. So I think that covers me at the moment. And Jeff, it looks like we've got some of the results from our poll, which I will share right now. And I'll leave you to comment.
Never believe any survey with over 95%.
You should know, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay.
So,
we may not have a completely representative sample of the British public here, but anyway.
So Terry, Damian's going to say a few words first before Jeff does.
Apologies, sorry. Yeah, Damian, please.
Okay, thanks, Terry. And I'm glad that North Korean democracy lives in modern COVID-ridden Britain. I simply want to say thank you to everyone who's taken part in all the workshops. The all-party group is tremendously grateful that so many people have devoted time and talent to helping us get this far. And this is a very important project. But I will now, in the interest of time, hand over to Jeff so that he and Tina can give us a sort of broad outline of where we are before we go into a more detailed discussion. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Damian. I'm just going to remind those of you who may not have been part of the plot where this fits into the process that we've been working on for a good year now. Damian Green and Tina, with help from their friends, founded the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity. And its first goal was to look at the manifesto commitment of the government to increase healthy life expectancy by 5 years. We thought that was a marvellous goal, but there had not yet been an action plan to implement it. So we decided we would develop an action plan, a strategy, to set out what needs to be done to make it possible to increase healthy life expectancy by 5 years. We published that in February. Matt Hancock spoke at the event, as did Andy Briggs and many others, and it was a marvellous launch for the event. We were then stopped on our process of discussions with Number 10, with DHSC and Public Health England, by the COVID crisis. And one might have thought that COVID knocked this goal out of the water, but not a bit of it. COVID has actually shown how the manifesto commitment of the government to increase healthy life expectancy is absolutely fundamental, not just to the health of our society, but also to its economic well-being. Our poll, with all the decimal points, illustrates that that now has become almost a truism for all of us. So this event is looking at, or this process is looking at one of the 9 recommendations of our strategy: how to maximize the contribution of business to improving the health of a nation and making it possible to increase healthy life expectancy by 5 years. And some points, you know, it won't happen without business. That's often the case. Public policy by itself is rarely sufficient to bring about change. But also, it's clear, as the poll shows, and we know, that a healthier nation is good for business as well as good for the nation. So our exam question is, given that, what do we need to do to maximize businesses' contribution to improve the health of our nation, whether it's businesses as an employer or a provider of goods and services, as an investor, or how they actually lobby and market themselves to government and to society. And so I'll come back to this at the end, but we think that part of that will be the formation of a business coalition for healthier aging. And as part of that will be a better dialogue between business and government and the Aging Society Grand Challenge. So this event this afternoon is the culmination of the consultation and the learning that we have had with a great range of people for a wide number of sectors. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing the final discussions. Thanks, Tina. Over to you.
Thank you, Geoff. And we can go to the next slide, which will highlight, the previous slide, please. There we go. So that slide essentially highlights some of the key themes that have come through the series of 4 round tables that took place this month with the support of Terry and his team throughout. This involved about 300 people over the course of 4 round tables. And really the whole point of this was really to make this as open and as participatory as possible, engage the community in the whole process of deciding on the need and the purpose of the Business Coalition and the Business Index. So the first theme, the new social contract, and this good business equals good business. Business contributions to health as an employer, but also as a provider of goods and services, needs to become an ESG mandate. Good social impact will in time be good commercial shareholder impact. That is, good business means good business. Government can't do everything on its own to achieve better health of the nation. So business does have to be a key stakeholder, and indeed the NHS is not the only one. So business does need to step up to the plate, and in the COVID experience, employers and customers are expecting this more than ever. The Business Coalition could be a vehicle and an index, a way of measuring this, and provide a source of competitive advantage by attracting talent, maximizing retention, driving up sales, as well as customer loyalty. Business also, and this came up a few times, business has a major role in designing the new world of work. Professor Sarah Harper talked about age-integrated workforces, lifelong learning, better support for those with caring responsibilities came out quite strongly. And Rachel Neiman spoke to the need of ensuring digital literacy and inclusion to make sure it's not going to get worse and make sure it gets better, because there is a risk of it getting worse as well. Tackling ageism has emerged as a key theme throughout, and we need to develop a shared language and this concept of age literacy. I know Yvonne will be coming on to that. The key values we explored that, discussed, we talked about bravery, we talked about kindness, but the ones that really stood out were around localism, and the Co-op spoke a lot to that with their Community Wellbeing Index, agelessness as a concept, and collaboration. Collaboration came out strongly over and over again. The next theme, health equals wealth. Well, we already know from the poll that many people feel quite strongly about that connection. The primacy of health over GDP was actually mentioned by Andrew Scott in the first round table, and the New Zealand Wellbeing Index was cited several times, and indeed Jacinta Ahern. Personal and local equals national health resilience. That's another theme that came out really, really strongly. We need to strengthen the resilience of our personal health, our community health, and from there we can build better national health. And there's a lot of discussion around a so-called decentralized model for health resilience, where it comes from the individual, comes from the family, the neighborhood, the community. Sort of hyper-local was an interesting theme. We need better use of technology and data, better housing. I know John is a champion of that. More than ever, we need to prioritize prevention. Again, a key theme that came out in our Health of the Nation strategy. Better nutrition, tackling diabetes and obesity were raised across all the roundtables. There's inadequate regulation in the food industry, limited knowledge and skills in the general public. Boris's war on fat is indeed timely. Employers could play a bigger role in helping individuals address their personal health risks and helping with the related behavioral change, which is complex and difficult. Incentivizing business and measuring their contribution to health, both negative and positive, could come via a number of schemes which we explored in the roundtables: accreditation, kite mark standards, a lot of talk on a multi-dimensional business index. Building on what we already have that works, but underpinned by access to data from public and private sectors, which will require the appropriate legislation governance structure to really do this, but also plugging the data gaps and learning from data on healthy people, not just sick people. These are all concepts we want to explore in our open life data data framework, which is a key recommendation in our Health of the Nation strategy. Health and climate change, interesting links there. Health is where the climate change agenda was 10 years ago. Climate change has become a core part of risk management in the finance and investment sector. And a core idea is to develop a risk management framework around health off the back of the crisis. John Godfrey will tell us more about that. A successful policy for healthier, longer lives should be aimed as much as the young and as much as the older populations. We could see a reset for health and also reset for green. Living greener means living healthier and longer. And the climate change agenda is at the forefront of the minds of many people under 30. The role of government, which Damian will speak to in a second, there are clear opportunities that were signalled on how regulatory frameworks can encourage business to step up to the plate and also very critically support more agility and innovation, like we're seeing right now with vaccines. The collaboration we need to see more of with government, business, and academia came out very, very strongly. So I'm going to hand over to Damian, who will pick up on that point. Damian.
Thanks, Tina. Clearly, all these great ideas floating around need to attract the attention of government, and healthier, longer lives and business activities that contribute to them need, I think, to attract the attention of government to be firmly set in the framework of being an essential contribution to the recovery from COVID, because that's going to dominate all government thinking for as far ahead as the eye can see. So it can't just be a nice to have, it's got to be something that's essential. Now, I think we should start by reverting to one of the principles that we started with in the all-party parliamentary group, which is essentially that prevention is much better than treatment. And we've already asked for a step change in the NHS budget, so more of it is spent on public health rather than just on treatment. But I think coming out of this, we need to think that incentives for business need to encourage that to happen as well, both inside the businesses themselves and also to produce the products that will enable people to lead healthier lives. So that's one thing, but other things that only government can do is promote some kind of national well-being index that Tina just referred to along the New Zealand lines. But obviously you could do that not just on a national basis for the whole population, but also try and develop a series of metrics for individual businesses so that they can be well-being businesses. The idea of a national forum encompassing government and business and academic figures to gather evidence and to spread innovation and best practice is another one that could well be a sensible ask for government in the coming years. And a couple of thoughts that spin off from things that the government is already doing. For example, the previous Prime Minister set up a race disparity audit. I think a lot of the discussions that have been had in the workshops about ageism and agelessness, I wondered whether we don't need an age disparity audit as well, so that we've actually got some data so that people can understand what is actually happening both in the workforce and elsewhere. And yet we don't collect the same level of information about the age profile in individual businesses, as we now do about the race profile of boards, the number of women on boards, various other protected characteristics that we try and promote equality through legislation. We haven't done that traditionally about age. Maybe we should think about that. And another, if you like, spin-off from a good idea that's already been had from there's a disability confidence scheme that businesses can sign up to if they are good at employing and promoting people with a disability. We need an equivalent age confidence scheme so that businesses can get some sort of kite mark if they are good at preventing ageism and promoting agelessness. So there's a number of practical things we should do. And as a final thought, which again I've taken from the many interesting discussions that have been had, is that we do need a story. We need a narrative of why this is important and why this is vital. And in the first instance, we need a narrative for this group, for these groups to take to government. But from then on, we need to show that the government will need to have a narrative to take to the population at large, so that we can embed this as an important way of creating a better society in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Damian. We're going to turn now to Ben Page, who's been involved in a few of the roundtables, actually. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks. So polling that we've done during the crisis has shown that the British public interestingly do prioritise health over the economy. And indeed, that's why the public is pretty anxious about easing the lockdown. And, that there will be economic implications of that. But it's pretty clear where people's priorities are. I think just to build on what we've been discussing, the themes from the roundtables, and indeed Damian's points that we've just heard, to me, and when I look at as running a reasonably large business of 2,000 people in Britain, we've got a whole load of initiatives that we now do at work around gender, around mental health, that we certainly weren't doing when I started work 33 years ago. But on ageism, there's nothing. So there's all sorts of charters that I sign up to on LGBT rights, on mental health, and of course we have government tracking on gender, but we don't have anything on ageism. And I think that's a reason I'd emphasize the importance of interventions in the workplace, is because what the data shows about what happens during recessions, and it looks very likely that we're going to have one, it's very hard on the young, but it's also very hard on people in their 50s or 60s who start looking for work, or indeed who lose jobs during a recession and then want to try and stay in the workplace. So we know that even before COVID-19, employment falls off a cliff over 55. And we know employment is part of, is good for people for all sorts of reasons. And so we certainly, I think, need to do something, because the recession that looks almost certain to be upon us is going to make the challenge even harder. And so we probably do need, in the same way that I'm required to explain how many women or men I have in different roles and pay differentials, we may need something appropriate to look at the age profile of employees. If all the people leaving are aged 50, what is going on, and why don't you employ anybody over 50 or something like that? We would need to do. I think secondly, the crisis is a moment to reset on public health. It's always the Cinderella of health service spending. And it's just possible that there could be some general public health reset after COVID-19. We've already discussed Boris Johnson's sudden interest in obesity after his brush with death. And of course, there's a very strong link between or correlation with obesity, diabetes, etc., in terms of who actually dies of COVID-19. So there's one chance to have use this as a part of a more general reset on health and well-being by employers, by building in and encouraging them to offer, with all sorts of packages from insurance companies, Public Health England, the NHS and others, on, for example, a midlife health and wealth check that you could ask people to do. We know that sort of reset is really important. It's far too late to leave it for people to start worrying about things when they're in their 60s. And that, I think, so there is this sort of moment of opportunity that we need to seize, and that would be my pennyworth. But it will need, I'm afraid, some regulation. Not all business is going to do this, even though it's good for their employees and good for the country, without a little bit of carrot and stick.
Thank you so much, Ben. Very helpful. So Yvonne Cincino, Global Co-Leader of Next Stage at Mercer, is going to come on next and give us her perspectives on what we've been hearing.
Thanks, Tina, and thanks for your comments also so far, Damian and Ben. I work for Mercer, which is a global HR consulting firm. So in that context, I represent what's happening with employment, what employers are doing to respond to this. We have a wealth of data. We're running a real-time global survey looking at how employers respond to this with over 100 questions in there. So we're seeing firsthand exactly how companies are reacting and dealing with this. Some very interesting findings coming out. I also represent today the Healthy Aging Advisory Group, so part of the business, the Challenge Fund. And of course, that fund is helping to support the Healthy Aging Challenge through both investment and research. So I have two hats on today. My thoughts on the key themes here. Let's pick up on social contract first, this good business point. Inclusion, we know, means good business sense. We know that diversity and inclusion create all sorts of outperformance. We know that age diverse teams outperform. We know that gender diverse teams outperform. Those facts still hold true. But they also give a company a strong sense of purpose. And some of the employers and companies we're working with at the moment that want to be remembered post-COVID for doing the right thing are looking to be able to reflect very well in these areas. And I would implore those employers to consider the whole aspect around age diversity in that agenda. It's the last bastion of diversity and inclusion. Age is always the forgotten one. On some of the workshops we've been in earlier today, we've acknowledged that it's still, ageism is still rife, and not just in things like recruitment, but as Damian and Ben alluded to earlier, all of the equity checks you would typically do with gender need to be factored in. So it's things that are a bit more obscure. Recruitment's fairly easy to measure, but things like distribution of training spend, the distribution of performance grades upon which pay and bonus are often determined, the distribution of promotion, etc. And it's bringing that data together in a very transparent way that will enable inclusivity to really flow through. And it was already difficult in our experience to create a solid enough business case for companies to employ older workers, despite all the evidence that the outperformance, the productivity, the experience, etc. But we believe in the high unemployment situations we'll see coming through, that it will be even harder for older workers to get their fair share of that deal. But I think this is part of the social contract. The impact is enormous on jobs and pensions. And this point about health equals wealth and vice versa, wealth equals health, I totally endorse this point. And if you're not healthy, you can't work. And similarly, if you're not skilled, you can't work either. So I would add a third dimension into that one, that health, skills, equal wealth, and vice versa. The whole thing for me falls into those three categories. So financial wellness has been severely impacted throughout this crisis, and we know there's enormous anxiety from a wealth perspective, a financial wellness perspective. And to enable some of this wealth creation through good working, we need to see, and I'm working with a number of companies in this area at the moment, we need to see much more creative employment models. I've just come from the panel before this one in the Longevity Leaders session where Unilever presented 3 new models of working, 3 new employment models, really, really interesting, but they revolve around giving flexibility, creating new hybrid contracts somewhere between full-time worker and gig worker. So it's a whole new deal. You've got more security than a gig worker, but less restriction than a full-time worker. Building into that a program of social protections that gig workers don't normally see, and also training and opportunities to redevelop skills in the direction you want to do. So I would implore businesses really two things, and that's the inclusion and make that part of the social contract, and look to create these new flexible working and employment frameworks that can enable this to happen successfully.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Really interesting, and we'll definitely need to look at that that webinar with you, Leva. Really interesting. So next we're going to have John Godfrey spend a few moments. John, are you there? John?
I'm here, yes, still here.
Excellent, there you are. Good to see you. Yes, John, over to you.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'll start by saying it's been a fantastic program of virtual round tables, and I think there's a lot of thinking has come out of this which should be adopted and hopefully will be adopted. This is true at an overall macroeconomy level. It's true at a community level. You see these vast correlations, and it's true also at an individual level. What I want to talk about is how this is true. What we're trying to do here is increase resilience. And there's a big correlation or parallel between what has happened on climate and what has happened around, or is beginning to happen around health. And I think that'll pick up after allergy. 10 years ago in business, the concerns about warming and climate were the preserve really of a minority group regarded as somewhat eccentric. People thought there was a trade-off between doing the right thing for the environment or for the climate and making money. Today that has turned right around. It's now mainstream for all businesses to be thinking about what is their climate impact, how exposed are they to climate risks, and are they aware of opportunities to mitigate global warming and to play their part fixing the climate crisis. How have we got from there to here? Well, it's been a series of different alliances, it's been campaigns, it's been and it's been hearts and minds. But what has been incredibly important has been that it has also involved accurate metrics. Because if you have metrics, people can apply proper scrutiny. You don't get greenwashed to the same extent anymore, and we should get on board with our agenda. So that's really my call, if you like, to develop a risk management framework, much as is being developed for climate, for resilience and health. And firms could be held to account for what they are doing in that space. Now, each firm will have a different agenda and a different way of contributing, and each firm will be concerned with finding both the opportunities to avoid downside risk and make decisions and spot opportunities to make money out of this, which is fine. We want to motivate people in the best possible way. So I think that's why we need to develop the right metrics, the right indices. We need to sign up to that, and we need to make sure that that is widely recognized amongst observers and amongst markets. As I work for one of the largest investors in the UK, almost everything we do now has an element of ESG investment or climate in it. I would like that in time to have to be the same as regards health and well-being. And I think that's where we need to get to. So I will simply leave it at that. There's a lot of work to be done around it because the devil is always in the detail. But I think that is how we move this debate forward in the mainstream of business.
Thank you so much, John. The line was a bit tricky, but I think we managed to get everything. And you're absolutely right. The practicalities and the how is often the most difficult. So I'm going to invite Professor Richard Barker, who chair of the Health Innovation Network and, of course, was the chair of the Population Health, Public Health and NHS Board for the APPG last year. So Richard, would you like to go next?
Tina, Geoff, Damian, thanks for the opportunity to contribute to this. Yes, so I chair the Health Innovation Network, which is one of the academic health science networks set up actually in 2011 with a report called Innovation, Health and Wealth. So we try and tie those two together. But I'm also involved in a number of business initiatives in areas like testing, application of artificial intelligence, and starting to think about this obesity question. And it's very interesting, having just listened to John, I started thinking about vulnerability, which obviously was highlighted by the whole COVID crisis. But then, like John, I turned it around and started to think about health resilience, personal health resilience, community health resilience, national health resilience, and what we can bring to that as a business community. I think we can bring to it, first of all, data and data analysis. I think we will be analysing the COVID experience, and I think that we will find that links rather closely to long-term health resilience in all kinds of other ways. Because as everybody knows, the vast majority of diseases are age-related, just as severe COVID infections have been age-related. Started also to think about biomarkers for those in the life sciences industry. What are the measures you can take for resilience? How do we decide somebody is more or less resilient? And digital tools to promote health resilience on the part of individuals, which have to link to what I increasingly talk about, propensity to act. It probably doesn't take a COVID infection to know if you're a bit overweight, and that might lead to obesity. So what can we do with digital empowerment to trigger the kind of activities that we would like individuals to see? So very quickly, what could a business coalition do? Businesses can and should take an active interest in the personal health resilience of their employees. Has to be obviously handled in a sensitive manner, because it's a relationship that has its difficulties. But businesses also ought to be interested in the health resilience of the communities in which they sit, rather than, in a sense, go through the factory gate or the office door blind to where they are making their money and making their products. But I think, as John was saying, there are actually going to be some interesting business opportunities too. I've mentioned some of them already, the application of artificial intelligence to understand what makes for resilience. They're going to be products that Lynn Cox and others have been working on to deal with senescent cells. And increasingly, I think, diagnostic products to measure where does somebody's health resilience sit. And as I've already said, digital solutions that help them do what they know they ought to do. And then final point is that, we've learned a lot in this crisis about public, private, and indeed third sector collaboration. People have forgotten the normal roles in which they thought they found themselves. And so collaborative experience and collaborative atmosphere that we've created and seen in many different ways through the COVID crisis, I think needs to drive us to continue to work on this question of health resilience in a public-private partnership fashion, which includes things like open data and open data initiatives at a regional level and at a national level. So it's going to be a big agenda, but I think I agree entirely with what Tina and Geoff said right at the beginning, which is this whole problem has given us enormous impetus, even though it's given us a pause for thought.
Thank you so much, Richard. Yes, let's not waste the crisis. And absolutely, there's going to be many people, and we're already seeing there's been a boom in many health tech and sort of digital solutions already emerging from the COVID crisis. So our final panelist presenter is Andy Briggs, Government Business Champion for Age and the Aging Society. So Andy, would you like to come on next, please?
Thanks, Tina, and thank you to longevity leaders and the APPG for all the excellent work in this space. I think it's been a fascinating series of workshops, and I very much agree with a lot of what's been covered in the workshops, that the need for the social contract, the integrated approach, the scale of the opportunity, and a lot of the key themes and ideas that have been discussed. So probably what I'd like to focus a bit more on in my comments is I think there was much less discussion of the why business should get involved and the how business should get involved. And I think they are key questions we need to address. I mean, on the one level, the why for me is very clear, but it is challenging to get this message across amongst all the other things businesses are dealing with. But if you think from one perspective, 50% of consumer spending in the UK is done by over 50s. And so you know, the benefit for businesses of focusing on this segment and thinking about the needs of over 50s, for me, is very clear. There tends to be an obsession with millennials and thinking about digital solutions for millennials. Well, 50% of consumer spending over 50s, I think that's a key focus. You know, there's a strong body of evidence that says that for those that want to work aged over 50, their health and well-being will be better if they are working aged over 50. And then from a business perspective, the why is that in the UK we have twice the number of people leaving the workforce through the ageing population as are coming into the workforce through the education system. So if businesses don't embrace more older workers, they really will struggle to have the skills and capabilities that they need. I can completely agree with the focus on sustainability. I think you know, for me though, it needs to become much more an attitudinal point rather than a box ticking point. That we all as businesses have a role to play in society. I mean, I've been asked on many occasions. I run Phoenix Group, FTSE 100, as we combine with Reassure, will be the UK's largest savings and retirement player. And we moved 99% of our colleagues to work from home within 10 days, including customer contact centres. We still had call answer rates above 90%, customer satisfaction above 90%. And the point for me out of all of that is there's many businesses that do need to go back into a workplace. We don't. So our role in society right now is to carry on working from home and allow others to go back while keeping the overall infection rate lower. And I just think that's a kind of key attitudinal point about the broader role of business in society. But so while those reasons of why businesses should get engaged are really clear, the reality through the business and the community agent work leadership team that I've worked in, it is really tough to get this on the agenda. As Yvonne just said, it tends to be the poor relation with regard to diversity and inclusion, in spite of the kind of the strength of evidence that age diverse workplaces are better workplaces from all perspectives. So asking the kind of how do we get businesses involved, a few thoughts there. It does seem to me that you know, one of the positives of this dreadful COVID-19 pandemic is that it has kind of unfrozen some of the ways that businesses work. We have embraced far more around flexible working, and I think we should really look to change our working practices longer term as a result of that. I think all of us are seeing that we can get benefits from employee well-being with a better balance of working from home, with less travelling. We're also seeing a real uptick in the use of digital and video. We've seen big upticks in those areas. That's also better for the environment. I think midlife MOTs have already been touched upon. That's one of the areas that we've got real cut through and traction in, and that is looking at health, wealth, and career prospects for aged over 45s. Very high take up, very strong feedback. I think it's real positives there. I think right now businesses really need to focus on their carer policies. Carers, I think it's 70% of carers have said they have materially more, on average 10 hours more caring work they're doing at the moment. All too often people end up leaving the workforce because they can't handle caring responsibilities without proper carer policies within the workplace. So I mean, there are some of the areas I think we can focus on for the how to get businesses involved. I guess we're at the early stages of a long road here. I think a debate around really understanding clear reasons why businesses should get involved. I think focusing on that how businesses will play its role. and then focusing on how we really do make sustainability absolutely core in all businesses, rather than and from a broader attitudinal perspective, I think is also critical. Thanks,
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy. That was really, really helpful and insightful. So I think, so we've got 20 minutes left of the program, and we've got about 15 minutes now for Q&As. So what we're going to do, we've got about, I mean, I know there's been many, many chats coming through, which is great. I'm going to go to the actual Q&As and literally, I think probably go through them in turn. So I'm going, and I hope I'm doing this right. So I'm going to ask William Baines. Would you like to answer this question live, William? Are you there, William? William Baines? Okay.
Now I'm on.
Oh, there he is. Excellent. Hi, William. Do you want to ask the question yourself, just so we're very clear on what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that most people do accept that wealth and health are that directly related. I think certainly news and government reports on GDP seem to relate more to things like banking and highly automated big industry, which doesn't require that many people. So if there's a lot of people in the country that are not, frankly, that healthy, does that really impact the wealth of the nation at all? And if it does, how do we get that concept across?
So who would like to answer that question? I don't know. Richard, would you like to answer that question?
With a certain amount of temerity, because I know William from the past, and he's not going to be easily persuaded. So I totally agree that the large sectors of the community that have that contribute to the GDP and can be very unhealthy whilst they're doing it. That I completely agree. Certainly when something like COVID comes along, we see what an enormous impact on GDP the consequences of the pandemic have got. So had we all been so healthy that nobody was suffering badly from COVID, we would not have had the lockdown. So that's kind of extreme. And then the third piece I would say is that clearly we spend an enormous amount on the NHS. We should spend even more, but much of that is chronic disease. And that chronic disease is directly age deterioration related. So we would not need to spend as much on the NHS and of course on social care were people to have more health resilience.
Thank you so much.
Good, William.
Thanks, Richard. Is there anyone else from the panel who'd like to comment at all?
I'll just add a few words. I think it's
Yvonne and Damian. Okay, Yvonne, you go first, and then Damian.
Okay. As I said earlier, I think I'd add skills into that mix. But I really do think that there's a very strong correlation between health and wealth. And if you add skills into the mix and the value of skills, just understanding how much more earnings potential you have by adding a few skills to your belt and exploring how you can use those to add even further to economic productivity could be very useful piece of information for people to build their own wealth via that means.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Damian, you wanted to say?
I always literally wanted to give a one-word answer, which was obesity. If there is one health issue that we could solve relatively easily if public health information and prevention were more effective, that would reduce absenteeism. Well, we've seen what's happened in the case of this outbreak, very sadly, that also would massively reduce strain on health service and release resources for other things. It would be curing the obesity epidemic.
Thank you, Damian. Yes, and we've been hearing a lot about that in the media in the last week or so. Now the next question I'm going to ask. Now I'm going to ask Charles, and it's a related question, but I'm just going to see if Charles would like to say it in his own words. Charles and Leslie, are you there? Charles? So I'll read it out. So Charles has made this point. What are your views regarding the deteriorating figures now emerging around the care of non-communicable disease in England? This does not bode well for the future. It links in a little bit, I know, to what Damian has just mentioned, but is there anyone else who'd like to answer that question? Richard, Geoff, anyone?
Well, I think, Jeff, very quickly, because I discussed this with Charles the last couple of days. I mean, what's happened is that whilst we have, so to speak, protected the NHS in the emergency room, we haven't protected the NHS in almost everything else it does. Unfortunately, we've gone backwards on non-communicable diseases of all kinds, including obesity and diabetes, as Damian just highlighted. So we've got a massive recovery plan, but that's completely synonymous, I think, with the agenda that we're talking about.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go, Charles. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. I apologize.
That's fine. That's okay.
There's another dimension I think we need to understand, and that is that it's already becoming obvious that the care of non-communicable disease is really going south, partly because our health system is concentrating on the management of COVID, of course, as one would expect. But also because it's likely that we are going to see a second wave. This is going to continue. And because this is going to continue, unless we do something really quite rapidly, we are going to be in a position where the already difficult situation we have to promote healthy, productive aging is going to deteriorate, and probably quite quickly. So I think action is needed really quite quickly. We have enormous opportunities because of the transition to digital modalities of non-communicable disease, which is inevitable because of the changes that are taking place. But somehow they don't seem to be priorities. This is urgent work.
Absolutely, Charles. Anyone would like to comment on that before we move on to the next question?
I mean, it's more of an observation. I mean, the death rate in our care homes from this is quite phenomenal compared to other European countries. But what's sort of, I think, difficult to acknowledge is that it doesn't cut through in public opinion in the same way as people dying in accident and emergency or A&E or anything else. And I think there's all sorts of reasons which we don't have time to go into now for that. But social care is a Cinderella part of the service. Maybe again we'll see something to fix it. It won't go anywhere near as fast as Charles would like. But I think that it is quite remarkable what has happened for all sorts of reasons in our care homes. And if there's another wave, well, I mean, it seems to be keeping going to a certain extent in care homes anyway. But if there's another wave, I don't know. But I'm not sure what urgent action we would do apart from pouring resources in at this stage.
Tina, it's Andy here. If I may just make a comment. Apologies, it's not directly related to the question, but I've long felt that the level of housing in the UK, housing stock that's suitable for assisted living, it's about 0.5%. And if you looked at countries like US, Australia, New Zealand, it's more like 5%. And it does seem to me that when you get an epidemic like we have at the moment, I mean, the situation in care homes has been truly harrowing and horrific. If we did have an environment where we had a better setup for more people to receive the care they need at home with the right support mechanism around it, then it feels to me that the ability to control the spread of a pandemic would be much better. And that's where an opportunity I do see for business, because if you can create a kind of proposition where you go to areas where there are a high propensity of people in starting to get to the stage of needing some care support, and you've built a proposition in that local community where you can make adaptations to the home, put in the alarm systems, have wardens available and so on for a particular community area, that people are staying in their own homes. It feels to me there's a potential for long-term capital investment in that type of a proposition that could bridge that gap we have between ourselves and other countries.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy. So I've got a question here and there are a couple about sort of community resilience, but I'm going to take one from Roy Sandbach. Roy, would you like to ask your question, Roy? Are you there? You talk about decentralized health improvement.
Yes. Am I online now?
Hello, Roy. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm just going to put a regional hat on here for a minute. I like the concept of decentralized health resilience. I think I might be tempted to call it improvement, as it gives it a more positive spin and story. However, my question is, that speaks to something that I observe in this region, in the Northeast particularly, and that is that there's a gap. The gap is between businesses, and I'm here talking about the middle-ranking businesses through small businesses. I'm not talking about the major multinationals, because we frankly don't have them here. But between business occupational health, local public health directors, and the regional LEP activities. And that's a gap that if we could fill it with people at heart, providing some kind of process or activity, then I believe that we could make a big difference in communities. Because I think businesses want that. They'll gain in productivity terms, they'll gain in absenteeism terms, and they'll gain in terms of community reputation. So how do we do that? How do we fill that gap? Thank you.
Fantastic, Roy. And I've got a couple of thoughts on who to answer, but John, would you like to go first, John Godfrey? Because you've been doing so much work on regional business building. Is John there? John Godfrey? No, he's gone. Anyone else who'd like to answer that question? Perhaps Andy or...
Yeah, I'm more than happy to make a comment. I think the point's extremely well made. I mean, I guess the two challenges I've kind of had with this is when you're talking to the larger multinational businesses, they'll tend to have HR departments, diversity and inclusion teams, where you can really get cut through on this agenda. I've tended to find with smaller businesses, getting some of this thinking onto their agenda is just much tougher when they're just so busy dealing with things. But the reality is, to crack this, we need a solution both for the larger businesses and for SMEs. The SME solution needs to be a local one, using LEPs and local activity. And I have to say, so far we've kind of struggled a bit with the how to make that happen. But it is something we need to crack.
John, you're back. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm back. I'm back, Tina. Sorry, I worked out the connectivity problem, which was a power cut, but I'm back. So just to pick up on that point, I think there is a role for larger businesses to try to help smaller businesses which are in their supply chain issues, and we do that on a number of other issues, and this would be a good area where that kind of collaboration can be useful.
Excellent. Now there's a few more questions. I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to ask a question actually. Now, Adrienne Berg from the States, because there's quite an international component actually to the roundtables and the interest coming from outside, into this group and vice versa. There's been a couple of international perspectives here. Adrienne, are you on the line? Would you like to ask your question, please?
I am. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Well, this is one of the action items. There were several folks speaking that talked about what the government can do and ask your government to do. And although we don't do it well, there's two things I've been involved with. One was the IRS did an actual cable show for 4 years on financial literacy for the public. And the Department of the Treasury had a committee on financial literacy. And now for the first time, our Secretary of Aging is having a podcast on aging literacy. So I'm just wondering, and in fact, our administration, for the first time, created a special press corps on aging to get information on aging out. So this is an interesting thing that goes to the public, but the content is coming from the types of people who are on your program team. Just wondering if that's not an ask that might be possible on the agenda for you, for the UK. And this, by the way, comes from various public relations departments within our government. We do have PR for the IRS. I know that brings a little levity, but yeah, and that's who's promoting all these things, paying for it, and that's where the budgets are coming from.
So very interesting point, Adrienne, and I'm going to just read out a quick thing from Sir Muir Gray, because he talks a lot about the language of aging and how could business develop a more consistent understanding of living longer and a shared meaning aging and growing older. So it's a linked question. But Damian, would you like to go first at that one? And then we're probably going to have to close after that to hand over to Jeff.
Okay, it's a fascinating idea. I love the idea of sort of HMRC having half an hour on BBC Two on a Friday night. I'm not sure it would be a ratings grabber, but absolutely using media, perhaps particularly social media, to promote aging literacy is a great idea. The sort of, I suppose, the equivalent, it's not as direct. It's been done here. Is where we have had at various times a sort of older person czar. Joan Bakewell did it for a number of years. And if the truth be told, I'm not sure it did that much to raise issues. I think it needs, in a sense, substance is more important than presentation here, in that if people understood the issues more, then there are loads of people who would want to talk about them, because there are more and more people of the age group directly affected. So it's one to take away to see what official communications could do to promote this kind of knowledge. But I suspect in the long run, in this country, it's much more promoting a much wider and sort of better and richer public debate, rather than have a sort of top-down lecture of this is what you should be doing about this.
Thank you, Damian. And I'm just going to ask, before handing over to Jeff, just a comment perhaps by Yvonne on this idea of having a common language for aging, which taps into the age literacy point that Adrian's just mentioned, before I go to Jeff. Any comments on that, Yvonne, that was mentioned by Muir?
I think the narrative needs to change. We've heard that for many, many years now. The narrative around aging needs to change. There's so much could be done to improve the way we think about aging and aging literacy. And certainly, I mean, the one phrase I really like is when we build these inclusive solutions, we want to make them right for young people to grow into, so they're not afraid of aging, and for older people to live with dignity. So that perhaps is the way of framing a narrative that each generation can buy into it.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. So we have quite a few questions that we won't get a chance to answer. We will try and get back to everyone with some thoughts after the webinar, and we will review all the chats. It's been so rich to see everyone's views and comments, and these will go into the thinking. So please, bear that in mind. I know we have to finish soon. But Jeff, would you like to provide the concluding remarks, and then we'll close in a few minutes.
Tina, thank you. I'd like to start with thanks, and then I'd like to set out for responses from people subsequently about what will be our next steps, because this is not meant to be just an enjoyable discussion. It's meant to be the foundation for some action. Thanks, first of all, I think, to Terry O'Dwyer, who has turned a physical, massive event into a virtual one in a way that is quite remarkable. So, Terry, I think you and your staff have been brilliant the way that it's been possible. All of us will thank Tina. Tina is quite remarkable. She pulls off these events and initiatives with no resources, virtually no money, and no staff. She's had to close down all her staff because there's nearly no money left. So I think that we need to both celebrate that and also do something about it. It is ridiculous that somebody who is making the amount of impact on these issues is left to do it all by herself.
You probably saw that Muir Gray suggested cloning Tina as one of the things that I hope we capture in the technology. But that would double the problem that you're quite rightly pointing out.
I don't know if my husband and my sons would appreciate that, though.
I'm going to say to you, I love her to bits, but I'm not sure I want two of her on my back. Let's move to next steps. It's been a wonderful discussion, and great thanks to everybody who's participated, both today and over it. It's remarkable, though, that you are talking about a lot of different things all at once. I've just made a note. You're talking about well-being, you're talking about aging, you're talking about ageism, you're talking about employability of people 50 plus. All of these are wonderfully important topics. I totally support that they matter. But the APPG will have to focus. and it's got a focus already. It's how can it persuade more to be done to try to improve healthy life expectancy by 5 years. And that above all means connecting back with government so that government actually recommits to that goal, which, as Damian says, is so apparently important in the light of what we've done. So when we've got a bit clearer, we will be going back into government and offering our support, encouragement and more to actually pick that up. And this agenda is about fundamentally how can business make a greater contribution to healthy life expectancy. And that's the central exam question. And I think we're going to have to focus on that rather than the 15 other wonderful things that matter and that we could do, because it's quite a big topic in itself. And essentially, that's about how to maximize businesses' contribution to improve healthy life expectancy and have a more resilient population. And therefore, it means more businesses recognizing their contribution and more businesses being able to increase the impact they have on the health of the nation. The idea of the Business Coalition is essentially an organization of businesses to promote business contribution, share good practice, to celebrate achievements, to challenge laggards, to have a very strong dialogue with government about business contribution and how it can be maximized. And we would clearly work closely with Andy on that. It might, as a coalition, develop into a forum for exchanging ideas, having dialogues and action. It might commission the business index. It might help to develop a risk management framework for health. So there's a range of things that it could do, but clearly it has to be clear about what its central mission is and what sort of role it would have and what its remit would be and what sort of organization it would need. And that brings us then to the next stage, in that we want a small group of people to work with Damian, Tina and me to define its role and remit and to develop within a few weeks' time what is effectively a plan as to how we would set up a business coalition, what its goals would be, what its ambitions, and what it needs, how we would build the thing. And people who will work on that with us, Dame Carol Black, George MacGinnis, Mary Bright, Andy Briggs is policy lead, John Godfrey. I think, John, you've had your arm twisted as well. There'll be a few other business people we'll bring into that. And so we hope by, I think, mid-July to have a discussion paper ready for wider discussion with people, answering that exam question. How do we build a business coalition? What would it be seeking to achieve? And what needs to be put in place to make it happen? So that's, I think, where we're going on the future. And we would hope then, in the light of that, to have built some strong participants from business to that by about September. So it began to come into life. That's the forward plan. Damian and Tina might want to add anything to that, but that's roughly speaking what we intend to do. And we will be pleased to get feedback from you on that over the next day or two as you reflect on it. But thank you all again for some brilliant generation of ideas. And thank you, Damian, Terry and Tina, for what you've done to bring this forward. Over to you, Tina.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Damian, do you want to say a few words before I just close on just one thing?
No, I mean, let's, otherwise it'll get like the Oscar ceremony. You close up, Tina.
I just want to mention, I know, you know, we've done an awful lot with very little, but we have had an enormous group of partners and also funding sponsors who have helped us throughout the year. I am in touch and having many conversations with potential funders, you know, in the next stage. We are due to announce some new funders who've just come through, some of whom have been involved in the post of the roundtables. We're going to make a formal announcement shortly. So, you know, things, you know, aren't as, we are basically building momentum and a funding pot. We do need more, much more, to be able to do everything that we're doing. And yes, I personally have invested a lot of my own time into it, of course, which Jeff alluded to. But we have a lot to do, and I think we can see that there is a huge amount of interest in doing something big together. And this is the power of the community that we're building. So hopefully we can achieve big things, you know, with all of us, you know, on side. So I will stop there, but again, thank you, Terry, and thanks to everyone who has been involved in this process. It's been extraordinary to see how much interest and enthusiasm and the incredibly valuable contributions that everyone has been making. Thank you.